How does a war that completely reshapes an entire continent even begin? Well, sometimes it starts with a single act of pure defiance. And in this case, it all started with throwing a few men out of a window.
Okay, so picture this. It's May 23rd, 1618. We're inside Prague Castle, and things are tense. You've got this group of really angry Protestant noblemen, and they are furious because they feel their religious freedoms are being trampled on. They're confronting the guys who represent the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor. The argument just explodes, and then, in this totally wild act of rebellion, they grab three of the officials and literally throw them out of a third-story window.
Yeah, there's actually a word for that. Defenestration. The act of throwing someone out of a window. But this wasn't just some random fight that got out of hand. This event, which we now call the Second Defenestration of Prague, was a very clear, very calculated message to the emperor. They were basically screaming, "We will not be ignored." So the big questions are, right? What pushed them to do something so extreme, and how in the world did this one event kick off a war that lasted for 30 years?
All right, let's get into it. To really wrap our heads around how this one incident could spark a massive war, we've got to look closer at what actually happened. Who were these guys who got thrown out the window, and what's the crazy story of how they even survived?
So the guys who went flying were two imperial regents and their secretary, basically the emperor's top men in the region. They were the living symbols of Catholic Habsburg rule in a largely Protestant Bohemia. And here's the wild part. Despite falling something like 70 feet, they all lived. Now, how they survived? Well, that depends on who you ask. The Catholic side immediately spun this tale that they were gently carried to the ground by angels, a miracle. The Protestants had a slightly different take. They said, no, they just got lucky and landed in a giant soft pile of horse manure.
And look, here are the actual windows at Prague Castle today. You can go see them. But in the end, it really didn't matter if it was a miracle or just incredibly gross luck. The act itself was the message. It was a full-on declaration of war. This was the point of no return. The Bohemians were in open revolt against the emperor, and the fuse for a much, much bigger war had officially been lit.
So why was that fuse so short? What made everything so explosive? Well, to get that, we need to rewind a bit and look at the religious tinderbox that was the Holy Roman Empire. These tensions had been simmering for decades.
This timeline really lays it out just how quickly everything went south. See, back in 1609, there was this thing called the Letter of Majesty. It was a big deal. It basically guaranteed Protestants in Bohemia could practice their religion freely. But fast forward to 1617, not even a decade later, and Catholic officials are just ignoring it. They start shutting down Protestant chapels. For the Protestants, this wasn't just a minor issue. It was a fundamental betrayal. A promise had been broken. And that defenestration in 1618, that was their answer. And if you look at this map, you can really see why this was never going to stay a local problem. The Holy Roman Empire, it wasn't one solid country. It was this crazy, volatile patchwork of territories. Some Catholic, some Lutheran, some Calvinist, all crammed together, all competing for influence. Just look at how mixed up it is. It wasn't just a tinderbox anymore. It was like a whole continent of dry grass just waiting for one little spark.
And that spark was the defenestration. Just as you'd expect, the Bohemian revolt did not stay local. Not for long. It spiraled out of control and became one of the longest, deadliest, and most destructive wars in all of European history, the 30 Years' War.
Now, it's easy to think of this as just a religious war, and that's how it started, for sure. But things got complicated fast. The whole conflict morphed into this messy, sprawling free-for-all. It became a struggle for pure power, driven by everything from family ambitions and land grabs to trade routes. You could say religion lit the match, but raw power was the gasoline poured on the fire. So how did it get so big? Well, everyone else saw a chance to get something out of the chaos. Denmark and Sweden jumped in, officially to support the Protestants, but, also hoping to snag some new territory. And then, and this is the real head-scratcher that shows what this war was really about, Catholic France actually started supporting the Protestants. Why? Simple. They just wanted to weaken their biggest rival, the Habsburgs. So yeah, what started as a religious dispute in Bohemia turned into an absolute European slugfest. And this quote right here, it really gets to the core of why this war was so uniquely brutal. The armies fighting weren't necessarily loyal soldiers defending their homeland. A lot of them were just huge bands of mercenaries. They fought for whoever had the cash. But what happens when the money runs out? Well, they just start taking what they need from the land itself, from the people. And that's what they called the wolf strategy.
Yeah, and this is what that wolf strategy looked like. It was horrifying. These mercenary armies, loyal to no one but a paycheck, just swarmed across the German lands like a plague. They weren't just fighting other soldiers, they were looting cities, burning farms, just destroying everything to survive. They brought famine, disease, and total devastation wherever they went. For the average person caught in the middle, it was literally hell on earth. Okay, so after 30 years, 3 decades of this relentless bloodshed, everyone was just exhausted. The major powers finally dragged themselves to the negotiating table. And the Europe that emerged from the ashes in 1648 was a completely different world than the one that had started the war. And this side-by-side really says it all. On the left, that's the messy, complex map of the Holy Roman Empire before the war. And on the right, that's the new reality after the peace treaty in 1648. The change is just staggering. Borders are totally redrawn, the old idea of the empire is basically shattered, and the whole balance of power in Europe has been turned on its head. So let's break down the new pecking order. France comes out of this as the new big dog in Western Europe. Spain, which used to be the dominant power, is now on the decline. Sweden is a major player up in the Baltic. The Netherlands is officially recognized as its own independent country. But the biggest change of all, really, is that all those little states inside the old empire were now sovereign. They got to call their own shots, to control their own destiny. Okay, so a bunch of borders changed in the 1600s. Why should you care about this today? Because the legacy of this war is absolutely massive. It didn't just redraw a map, it fundamentally changed the very idea of what a nation is. And this slide right here, this is the key takeaway. On the one hand, you have the old world idea, this dream of a single, unified Catholic empire with a pope and an emperor calling the shots for everyone. The 30 Years' War absolutely obliterated that idea. It was gone, forever. And in its place, a new world was born. A world made up of independent, sovereign states. Nations that are in charge of their own business inside their own borders. Sound familiar? It should. That's the foundation of the international system we live in right now. So think about it. That one single crazy act of defiance, throwing 3 guys out a window in Prague, set off a chain reaction that created the world of independent nations we all live in today. It really makes you think, doesn't it? If our current world system was forged in the fire of a 30-year war, what's it going to take to change it again?